welcome. I'm so excited about this panel. It's something we all know about with Battle for Tech Talent. We've got an awesome, very differentiated group of panelists with you today. I'm excited to introduce them. I'm an old school person, so I carry the cue cards. Scott Gibson, as you just saw in the short video, Chief Strategy Officer at Melwood, as you saw. He's doing amazing things, bringing jobs to people that have some sort of disability, including talent that is on the spectrum of autism, as you just saw. And the interesting part about this is that there is a program he started called Ability, where he is taking talent with autism and putting them into entry-level jobs where there's real tech need and scarcity of resources, so they can do cyber work and other entry-level type work. Very exciting. What I love about this is it connects back to what Scott Storetta said, is that with all the AI and all the technology we're going to talk about over these couple days, what matters most begins and ends with people. And I love it because Scott is living that. And you can look him up on melwood.org. And find out more about him. We have Judith Spitz, Judy. Judy's amazing. She was former CIO at Verizon, actually 30 years at Verizon. She was telling me that she was in an AI lab for Verizon in the 80s. So I think we should ask her about that, because I have no idea what that looked like. Really interesting. She's been awarded many, many times, Forbes 50 over 50 Notable Women in Tech by Cranes in New York. But today, she's founded, during the pandemic, a company called Breakthrough Tech. And what Breakthrough Tech does is connects the intersection between companies in industry with talent in academia, and we're talking Latinx, Black talent, talent that is hard to find. We're going to talk about that a little bit more today. And then we have Shobhana Ahluwalia. Shobs is also a very senior tech executive, formerly CIO of Peloton, also formerly a CIO of Uber, where she was in charge of networks globally. I can't even imagine what that was like. She sits on the board of trustees, or has, for the University of San Francisco. She's also been awarded Influential Woman in San Francisco. Check her out on YouTube. There's no shortage of videos. Super cool, and I love that she's a mom of a very young, adorable little girl, which I'm sure that will come out today. So I'm going to lob out a real easy question. You know, where are we here in 2023, right? It's just, Shobs, we were talking about this. During your daughter's short life, we've gone through just, during the pandemic, everything moving online, massive tech growth, huge amount of hiring. Open the papers now and you're seeing layoffs by any number of the biggest and some of the smallest tech companies. Just some quick thoughts. Scott, we'll start with you. What do you think about the environment? What's top of mind?
So top of mind for me are two things. One, more and more of us understand what it's like to live with autism. Our lives are touched by somebody who lives with autism. 1 in 40 children is diagnosed, and so we're seeing industry leaders lead into making their employment practices more accessible, because they're connected to personal stories where it will matter to somebody who matters to them, but also because they realize it's not just a good thing to do, it's a business imperative when you're talking about that large of a portion of the population. I think that this has really seen even more progress, though, because of one of the silver linings of COVID. One of the biggest barriers to employment for a person with a disability was the need to remote work, or the request to remote work even part-time. It was a commonly requested and commonly denied accommodation, but COVID taught us that more and more jobs can be done remotely, so we're seeing the workforce open up to more people.
Amazing. Judy.
Yeah, so, just to get us all level set on the challenge with the diversity issue that we have in tech, and Breakthrough Tech is primarily focused on gender equity in tech, but with an emphasis on Black, Latina, first-gen, low-income. But maybe most of you know this, but I'm always surprised for those who don't. But the problem has actually gotten worse over the last 30 years. Way back in the 80s when I started my career, I'm out there dating myself. 37% of the graduating classes in computer science were women, and at around 2006, it hit a low of about 17 or 18% over those years, and it has been stubbornly resistant to change. For the last 10 or 15 years, that number has barely moved, and the number for Black and Latina women is far worse, talking about 3 or 4%. And again, I listened to those amazing speeches all day today. It was, fascinating. Kudos to the people who put this conference together. And what I noticed is that for every one of the keynote speakers, after they talked about amazing technology and what the future is going to be, one of their concluding remarks had something to do with the fact that it all came down to the people who were working on that technology. Let's see, the first keynote speaker said something about humans in the loop as a checkpoint. We heard about is the technology in the end going to be consistent with our values, and how are we going to assure that? We heard a lot, of course, about the very question of AI fairness and bias. And all of that comes down to the who are the people who are sitting around the table making these decisions. And it's why I think, even though what we're talking about is not quite as sexy and fast-paced as what we heard about all day, in the end, if we don't get the right people at the table, we're going to be in trouble. And I'll just tell you quickly, this isn't new. This problem of bias has been around in the analog age, and many of you may either know or remember that in the early days of seatbelts, of airbags, they actually injured a lot of women and children. Why? Because the men and the test dummies were all based on the structural size of a male, and an airbag interacts with a woman's and a child's head differently. You may or may not know that until recently, artificial hearts only fit into about 60% of the chest cavities of women. Why? Same reason. Earliest speech recognition systems were lousy at recognizing the voices of women. And this goes on. The difference now is the pervasiveness of the technology, and therefore the impact of the bias. So the work that we're doing, I think, is just as critical in terms of who we get to the table as the advances in the technology.
For the record, I think talking about hiring is sexy. The last couple of years have been very interesting. I remember, like, a couple of years ago, we were lining up for talent. At Uber, we had created programs how to attract the best talent, attract the diverse talent, and we were still failing. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of improvement, but we were creating programs to go to these universities, different universities. We were working with organizations like Women Back to Work. We were writing code and programs to shorten our time to offer, just because each candidate had so many offers. We were doing all of those 2 years ago. All the focus was there. Get the right people, get them in, get them the best offer, do the right benefits, sell. I used to go, my admin had my one Saturday a month blocked out. Particular cafe down in Palo Alto, I would sit there for like 6 hours just meeting people after people, whether we had an open job or not. It was just networking, just telling them, what are we doing? What does Uber do? What's the scale? What's the new cool thing? And that was just getting your pipelines filled with candidates. Last year has been very different. So when I think about that, I say, what can we do great at this time? There's a lot of great talent out there. We still have the diversity problem, and this is diversity of thought, so this is all kinds of diversity. This is the diversity that both of you are talking about, ethnic diversity. I've been a woman in technology for 25 plus years, yeah, and I'm so good looking, but still I'm so old. It's amazing. I don't know how I do it, but I do. But this, I feel, is the time to focus on a couple of things very deeply. First of all of you who are running big organizations, big companies, you know the cost of hire, you know the cost of having vacancies, having open positions. Training is still a good idea. It was a good idea 10 years ago. It was a great idea 20 years ago. It's still a great idea. And I feel less than 2% of the companies do it well. We have good intent, but that is not enough. And we've got to double down there, and we've got to see how can we actually make it more executable. The second thing I think about is your internal operations are going to change heavily. So what do you really need in terms of talent? And then with that, how can you get the diverse talent in? How do you get the moms who took some time off and they want to get back into workforce? How do you work with, again, these great organizations and more out there where they have diverse candidates out there and they are being trained for these things specifically? They're being trained to work with AI. They're being trained to work specifically in cyber. They're being trained to work in not just entry-level tech, but even more niche areas of tech, and how do we do that? This is, I feel, the right time to do that, because you do have a lot of great talent available, and you want to double down on that.
Awesome. Shobs, I'm going to stick with you for a second. So all these layoffs are happening, and unfortunately, a little bit of first in, first out, we're seeing a lot of diversity being captured in that layoff. Are we going to see more capacity? Are we going to be able to hire more if more people are in the market?
Well, we definitely have a lot of good talent in the market. The capacity depends on a lot of new ideas coming up. We see a lot of emerging companies. We talked to the VCs this morning. You saw the numbers. So absolutely, there is need. The issue, and I feel the focus should be to make sure that you get the candidates that represent your customers. Are you selling to women? Are you selling to mommies? Are you selling to diverse people? And it also ties to a little bit of, I think, what you said, Judy, was bias. You want to have the right people working on your products to make sure that you can identify bias and then you can remediate it, because it's so easy to fall in that trap.
Yeah, Judy, go for it. I know you've got...
So what I want to jump in here and say is what is being written about, and there's this sort of pervasive thought that there's a scarcity of talent out there. And here's what's going on, because we study these numbers. There is a feeding frenzy looking for talent at the top 25 ranked universities in this country. Everyone is going after that talent. The number of women and diverse, underrepresented students at those schools is rather small, and everybody is going after them. In response to that, companies are saying, okay, I got to give up on higher ed. I'm not going to be able to get the talent and the diverse talent I need. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go around higher ed. You all know about this. I'm not going to require a college degree anymore. No college degree required. Skills-based hiring. Apprenticeship programs for people coming back into the workforce. Those are all good things. What I want to say to you is yes and. First of all, when a room full of C-level executives tells their kids that they don't need to go to college, then I'll start to believe that maybe college isn't required. But I don't think that's happening anytime soon. Here's the reality in terms of the numbers. And I know this in terms of gender because that's what we study. There are about 170,000 women in this country attending four-year institutions trying to get their bachelor's degree in a tech-related field. 150,000 of them, 92%, go to a school that's not a top 25 ranked school. 97% of the Black and Latina women studying computer science and related fields go to a non-top ranked school, okay? That is an incredible opportunity pool, not only of talent, but in terms of diversity, that companies are not tapping into. Now, they're not doing that because they're bad guys, okay? There are a couple of problems, and that's what the Breakthrough Tech organization is positioned to try to solve. One, those students attend 1,300 different colleges across the country. Companies cannot develop recruiting relationships with all of them. We know that's a problem. Second, if those students actually send their applications in, the hiring managers and the automated systems are looking for specific things on their resumes, and the resumes don't get through. Number one, the name of the university, that's a pedigree university. Number two, the opportunity to have built real stuff, which often comes from unpaid volunteer, weekend, hackathon, I know somebody who knows somebody work experience, which the women who go to these underserved schools that are working 2 and 3 part-time jobs can't get. So they can't, the barriers to entry presented by most of your recruiting organizations are keeping out the very students that you're trying to find. And that's what the organization Breakthrough Tech is trying to cut through. I can talk more about it, but in brief, what we do is we go out and find those students, and we create innovative experiences like micro-internships and other kinds of things like that in order to bring these students to you so that they can show their stuff. We don't ask you to hire them as interns yet. We don't ask you to hire them yet. Let them show you their stuff, and the results are absolutely mind-blowing. Their ability to land summer jobs and full-time jobs on their own increases tenfold just because we try something different in terms of getting the talent in your front door.
I'd like to tag on to that if I can, because I agree, the problem isn't the pool of talent. I think it's actually the way we're trying to screen and select talent. So one of the major themes Melwood has in every conversation with an employer is that the entry-level talent process is broken. It is overwhelmingly based on social interaction today. Think about your entry-level talent pipeline. You're meeting people at college job fairs or other mass-attended events. That is not going to work well for somebody who is hypersensitive with their auditory function. They're not hearing background noise, they're hearing 20 conversations while they're trying to focus on a conversation with you. If you're basing it on building a quick rapport, and many of us do because the resumes are thin at this point in the talent pipeline, that's also not going to work well. The first diagnostic criteria for autism is pervasive struggle and social interaction. This is not going to be the individual who's going to build a quick rapport with you. So we have to find ways to quickly assess skill and make sure that we're not just leaning into, I made a connection with them over coffee. I had a good 15-minute phone call.
Scott, that's so interesting because I was thinking about in the video, and the gentleman that you focused on self-taught himself 7 coding languages. So we're not finding the talent that we need, and the talent is going to be in everything. Right? It's no longer just in the CIO's organization, it's every part of the organization. So how are you working to bring some of that talent or educate companies about thinking about professionals on the spectrum and how it could bring diversity of thought?
So Melwood and nonprofits like it use a process that is almost exactly like executive recruitment. We are building up pipelines of talent, and when we form partnership with employers, we learn their job profiles and needs, and we present people. So we can actually create that first impression to facilitate an introduction. That's what happened with Brian. We asked, where's your pain in entry-level hiring in the DC offices? We built a profile for it, and then we matched several of our program graduates to it and did a quick walkthrough, the way Korn Ferry would walk through executive candidates. When this gets to scale, what we hope will happen is that Melwood and nonprofits like Melwood will be looked at as a workforce development pipeline, like universities were looked at 10 years ago, and we see recruiters reaching out to us, sharing their opportunities, because our graduates aren't just interested in tech and tech-adjacent fields. They come from all walks. And what we know is that when we can get somebody past having to rely on that quick social interaction, we can introduce them to great talent. Brian, quality assurance tester now at KPMG. Josh is a cybersecurity analyst for GDIT. We place people at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. These are employers with sophisticated needs, but a huge pain point when it comes to entry-level talent.
That's amazing. I've heard the U.S. Department of Defense is one of the top hirers of neurodivergent talent. Shobs, I want to go back to you and just talk about this incredulous tech dating game, and maybe with the current headwinds, right, things are softening up a little bit. So how, if we do need specialized talent, how do we woo them? And I have some stats here. And this comes from a Catalyst survey. 90% of tech talent said they would look for a new job if they were denied a raise in the next 6 months. We'll see if that holds true in the next 6 months. If you think about the US workforce, which contributes 10% of GDP, only 8% of our workforce is actually tech skilled. And the cost of hiring is up exponentially, right? That what you have to pay just to get the individual in the door, let alone their ongoing salaries, right, to these companies to source them. So it's up 85%. Shobs, what do you have to say about the tech dating game?
First of all, I like that I was at Uber. I was able to do some very fun things there. But See, when I was at the table talking to some of the people, like, interacting with some of our attendees, and things we ask is, what's the next big thing? That's what we want to teach our kids. That's what these kids want. That's what they want to work on. So what's our story? What is KPMG doing? And man, are you guys doing interesting stuff? Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's about the story which is out there. How do you do that at scale? Because that was always one of the things that, a lot of people coming out of colleges or coming out of other ways of learning, they're interested in doing things at scale. How do you do that? I think those stories are important. As an aside, I have a 14-year-old nephew who found himself an quote-unquote internship in the University of Dallas. He's actually based in India. He's not from here. He found it all himself. He's now learning machine learning and AI, all of those kind of things over there, and he's 14 years old. He actually got on a plane by himself, traveled to the US by himself, and that's what I feel a lot of kids his age are doing. Of course, when people are coming out of colleges, they're looking at these interesting things. So those stories, I feel, are really important. And going back to a little bit about D&I think what's important is also, what is the culture? What is the environment? Like, I spent a lot of time on the West Coast. I actually spent 13 years in one organization. Some other organization bought it, so 13 years. But I always felt that I had the need to explain, because people looked at me and they're like, 13 years in one organization? What's wrong with you? I've talked to so many people here on the East Coast, in Middle America, at KPMG, and you have amazing long tenured employees here. There's a reason for it. You create great environments. It is inclusive. There is learning, there is training, there is paths to grow, and I feel like all of those stories are really, really important when you're attracting talent. And training is still something I'm very passionate about. You already have a lot of talent. A lot of these companies have talent. It's about making sure that the talent keeps up with the changing times. And that's, honestly, to me, that's the only critical skill that you need to look for while hiring. Can you learn? Can you relearn? Can you relearn? Because things will change again in five years from now.
Can I add on to Shob's point about culture? Because I think culture is incredibly important. We can want to lean into diversity or neurodiversity, but if we don't dedicate ourselves to creating a culture of psychological safety, then we're probably going to fail. And this is one of the things that I think GDIT is doing incredibly well right now. If you watch Amy Gilliland's post, and this is the year of the human manager, when I'm talking about creating a culture of psychological safety, I'm saying let's create a culture where it is okay for people to advocate for themselves, where they know that if they express a need or an interest, that it will be taken seriously. It doesn't mean you're going to be able to meet every need or fulfill every request, but that they know they will be heard and that they're safe in expressing that request. When you do that, then you will really solve the retention problem after you get people in the door.
Okay, so this is interesting. I think we're going down the same path here. So psychological safety, right, and your tech talent and everything we've just heard about AI, right? Is my job going to go away? Is a machine going to take over what I know how to do, and how am I going to compete with the machine, right? Judy, I know you have thoughts on this. What is AI going to do for the workforce, and how do we build cultures that are still, I go back to that original quote, at the end of the day, the most important asset we have is our people. So how is that going to work out?
Yeah, so let me just make one comment about the dating game. I think the answer to that is to change the game. There's been a dating game. That is the way the tech recruitment has happened for the last 20-something years. And again, one of our keynote speakers made a huge point about fundamentally you have to change the work processes that you're trying to insert the AI into. This has been true since the beginning of time. If you take a new technology, whether it's cloud computing or mobile first, and try to bolt it onto the way you normally do business, you don't get transformational change. And my only point is the same thing is true of tech talent recruitment. You can't just bolt a diversity objective onto your standard tech recruitment process and think that anything's going to change. So we can go back to that at the end. But in terms of AI, since I've been there since the dark ages, first you heard the expression earlier, and I heard it at another conference, you're not going to be replaced by AI, you're going to be replaced by somebody who knows AI better than you. And I think that's true. And you saw that picture of the robot, and I think the expression was your AI coworker. What I believe has always been true, and actually been true since the beginning of time, and if you read Ray Kurzweil, he talks about it all the time, technology has always at its heart been at its best to augment human capability, not replace human, to augment human capability, which means you have to find a way to engineer an exquisite collaboration between people and machines. It's an easy sentence to say. It's a totally different thing to figure out how to get your business to do it. A collaboration between people and machines. And the longest running example I've seen of this since I started in AI for call centers, we used to call them operator services. Since the beginning of the earliest speech recognition automation systems, what did we do? We stuck them on the outside of contact centers to try to prevent people from getting to agents. Right? We all know this. They don't even publish the phone numbers anymore. They drive you crazy trying to automate as much as you can, and when you can't and it fails, it throws it over the wall, and you get to an agent and they ask you the same question. It's unbelievable that it's still going on today, that agents still ask the same questions because the technology is there to pass the data. At any rate, that is the opposite of a collaboration between people and machines. That's trying to stiff-arm your customer. Your customer, your most valued component of your business, you're trying to keep out of the business. And we've been investing in contact center automation technology for 30-something years. Anybody know anybody whose contact center budget is less than it was 30 years ago? Their call volume, it's amazing. And the same is true with other technologies. But in AI, the question is, how do you bring AI, I'm just using it as an example, into the contact center, sit on the desktop with your agents and collaborate so that part of the dialogue is handled by AI, part of the dialogue is handled by human, and there's this exquisite collaboration. And you can take that analogy to any other aspect of AI. I think it's Kurzweil who talked about AI as an exoskeleton. And to me, that's a great visualization of how do you layer AI technology to extend and advance human capability, not repeat it. But that is a business strategy. And as long as we try to bolt the technology onto the outside of whatever our business process is and expect transformative results, I think we're going down the wrong road.
So back to a quote in the beginning of the video from Melwood, right? It's about getting here, but it's also about learning here. So Judy, what you just said is we gotta use the machines and AI to improve the capability of people. Well, we all have massive amounts of personnel. How do we do that? How are we gonna pivot people, train people? What are you thinking about at Melwood in terms of helping people to pivot through your type of talent?
So we're talking with folks about how they use the technology as a tool. You know, right now we're focused on quality assurance testing. That's one of the biggest things. We are really focused. We see our biggest opportunity on the human side of AI. There is some human-centered learning that AI has to do for AI to work really well. And that's kind of the niche space that we've carved out and we're teaching to at this point.
That's right. And the values that we heard about earlier, right? Or just the content. How do you preserve that quality? Shobs, any ideas from your former roles?
So I think this is a tectonic shift. And the sooner we embrace it, the better our businesses are going to be. And I look at it in two ways. Again, internal operations, whether it's customer service, whether it's marketing content, whether it's some other examples, going to change drastically. For that, we need to understand how to work with AI. It's not necessarily creating LLMs. It's not necessarily all of those things, but you need to understand how to use it right. And training, as we said, is important, but there's lots of avenues out there. But at the same time, and I think Trevor mentioned it too, we'll be amiss if we don't see how our products are doing the same thing for our customers. And how do we enhance those, or how do we make sure that we are using today's tech capabilities in those products and then evangelizing those and selling it to our customers, making their lives better. So I feel both of those go hand in hand.
That's right. Judy, did you have something to add?
So I think a couple of things are true. Yes, we need trained AI talent to generate the next frontier. But the fastest growing job title in tech right now is machine learning engineer. These are not the PhD and master's degrees that are creating the next frontier. These are the people who understand how to take your company's data and turn the crank and bring business value. And so what we're focused on is training undergraduate students, in particular underserved students. By the way, however bad you think the numbers were for diversity in tech in general, it's even worse in AI, in between industry and academia. From an academic perspective, there's a scarcity of cutting-edge AI faculty. They are centered in the more elite institutions, so if you don't go there, you don't even have anyone to teach you. The second is, how do you get practical experience working on a real-world problem so you can convince a hiring manager that you can actually be effective? So the program that we've developed stands in the middle. Here's what we do. We actually have faculty from Cornell, MIT, and UCLA teaching undergraduate women, mostly Black, Latina, first-gen students, about machine learning industry tools. And then we partner with companies like everybody in this room. This is an unabashed pitch for you to lean in here, to provide a machine learning engineering project. We will bring the students to you, you don't have to pay them, to get that kind of real world experience in building something. Without that, they can't get their foot in the door. So we have to get academia to lean in and teach these students, not their own students. They're not teaching the MIT students. They're teaching students from across the country that we bring to bear. And we have to get companies like yours to be willing to work with our students, capstone project-like, but in a highly structured way. It does two things. It gives the students the experience they need to break into the field, and it introduces you to not just underserved talent, and I want to go back to your point about the dating game, but talent who doesn't have a chip on their shoulder that the only great place to work is a big tech company. So it's a perfect match if we can get both sides of the supply chain to lean in.
You know, it's true. LinkedIn says that it's 9 times harder to hire talent that has AI experience. And in addition to that, if you look at the female population of tech talent, it was just under 30% in the United States. That goes to the high teens when you're talking about AI. So the population to tap into is just much smaller. However, taking these non-traditional avenues where you're maybe stepping away from those top schools who are going down different avenues, the attrition rates of those individuals goes down exponentially. Some say as much by 45%. So there's a lot to think about in that. You know, what are some other companies? You all work with different companies. What are some, and you don't have to name them per se, as much as what are they doing that seems to be working well? We've heard culture. Scott, let's start with you.
One of the things that I think KPMG is doing well, and which is somewhat unique, we're seeing a lot of firms focus on creating a neurodiversity center of excellence or a concentrated program where here's where my neurodiverse employees are going to go. And that's progress when you've got such a huge unemployment and underemployment problem, but it's not really the end goal. The real end goal is inclusion. And what KPMG is doing really well is that it's baking this into its traditional hiring process. So we are talking about fully including neurodivergent individuals in the workforce. And I would just never understate the importance of small progress. It always starts with one hire. We're seeing similar stories elsewhere. Another thing that I see companies doing that I think is enabling success is we've got another number of companies that their path starts by learning. So I think we had somebody from Paramount here, had a manager from Paramount Nickelodeon reach out. It was April, it was Autism Acceptance Month, and they wanted to learn more about neurodivergence and neurodivergence challenges in the workforce. And we did a training for their team, and the next thing we knew, it led to a hire. And then it led to another conversation. I would stress the importance of employee resource groups. The reality is 1 in 40 individuals is on the autism spectrum. Autism is just one form of disability or neurodivergence. The reality is you probably have some folks who are in your workforce facing barriers and challenges today, and you may not know it. I mean, one of the unique challenges with a disability like autism is it's invisible. And sometimes there is an ability for somebody to do something called masking. And masking is where they understand kind of the role they're expected to play in the office or society. And so they suppress some of what makes them who they are, some of what they need to be comfortable in a space so they can fit in. And I've met individuals who have gone through our program who mask, and they will tell you it's exhausting. And so if you reach out, remember, creating that culture of psychological safety, so letting people know it's okay, and you create an employee resource group where you hear feedback from some of your existing workforce, we're seeing employers start to do that, and it's working really well. Not only are they making their place of work more comfortable for their existing workforce, but they're signaling to the world, we want people to come to us to work as they are. We will hear you out, we will make accommodations where appropriate, and that just enables good matches and it enables great retention.
I do, Todd, I want to give you a shout out for being just a fantastic partner. And what we see KPMG doing and companies like CVS Health and Barclays and Verizon and a whole bunch of others is leaning in to something that's completely different, which is a paid 3-week micro internship in January. Think about that. How many people I've spoken to saying, we don't do internships in January. It's like, yes, we know, this is different. Where we can bring these students into you pay them, it's during an academic break, you give them some resume juice that changes their life, and they introduce them to your talent pipeline. Think of it as a 3-week interview. We have companies like KPMG and others that now routinely host 40 and 50 sprinterns, we call them, every year. They now see this micro-internship program as a strategic part of their pipeline, not a nice-to-have social good, but they plan for it. They do backwards planning. This is how many new college hires we're going to have next year. Therefore, we need this number of summer interns. We want 50% of the interns to be female. Therefore, we need this number of sprinterns. And they do it annually as part of a process. And after 2 years, 50% of their summer intern class are female. That kind of strategic planning, I think, starts to change the game in terms of what's a routine part of a new way to think about tech talent recruitment.
Wonderful. Shobs.
Just to add on to that, so definitely big fan of non-traditional ways to hire. I know we have, in Silicon Valley, we have a consortium of CIOs that usually get to know about these different ways of hiring, even like different programs that happen, and a lot of us try and go and support that. On top of that, again, big fan of internal mobility, and I feel some companies do it really well. I think internal mobility, again, cost of hires, really, really expensive. Cost of not hiring is even more expensive. So to me, I'm like, you need talent now, you need your product now, you need to run your company now. We can't afford to say we can only do one of these things. So based on where you are, what you're running, what your constraints are, you want to do training, internal mobility, do that really well. You want to look at all of these different ideas of non-traditional ways of hiring, including internships, all of those kind of things. So I think there's no one silver bullet, unfortunately.
I saw a quote from a top 5 bank that said their expectation for tech skills is that we want you to have 60%. And we're going to give you the other 40 because we do it the way we do it. And we have our own culture or setup, whatever it might be, that doesn't apply with particular platforms. If you need specific coding skills in ServiceNow, well, then that's what you're going to have to go for. All right, just so for final comments before we get to that, we're going to do a quick quiz of our panelists. Fastest growing city for tech talent. This is easy.
Austin?
You got it. She's from Texas.
I'm from Texas.
So where do you find some of the best tech talent globally?
From our programs.
Clearly. Okay.
I want to say
Well played.
India, but I feel it was maybe a decade ago. So Southeast Asia somewhere?
India is still at the top, also Israel, not too surprising there. But our neighbors to the north, Canada, explosive amounts of tech talent. And this one I found very surprising. Last question, what state has the highest percentage of tech talent per capita? I know what you would say if it was not by per capita.
Virginia.
No, good guess though. Come on, throw something out.
Boston.
Audience, throw something out.
Boston. Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. Got it. So 6% of the workforce in Massachusetts are tech. It's only 5% in California. Of course, the denominator on that employee pool is much, much bigger. All right, just some final comments. There's been some really good recommendations here for the audience.
I think we've got to completely reimagine the entry-level hiring process, and I think we've got to come to grips with our willingness to be the first employer of somebody. One of the biggest challenges my graduates face is they go after what are posted as entry-level jobs that require 2 years of experience. I had a candidate walk into my office one day and say, "Mr. Gibson, where do you go for the first 2 years?" And I didn't know where to tell them. So that's something that we have to come to grips with.
Excellent.
Yeah, I would just say you can't solve the problem that's been persistent for the last 20 years with the same solutions you've always had. So you have to fundamentally think about your talent recruitment as a strategic part of your technology strategy and do some business process reengineering. What I would say is intermediaries like Scott's company, like Breakthrough Tech and others, are going to be a critical part of the formula because any individual company trying to solve this problem on their own is not going to be able to find that diverse talent. So look for an intermediary that you want to partner with.
Excellent.
Embrace all the ideas. It's not a mutually exclusive. We can't afford to say this or that. I think people who are looking for talent, we've got to embrace all of these ideas and go with, do all we can to get the best talent and the best diverse talent in our companies.